Hey, welcome everybody to Spirituality Adventures. We're glad you're tuning into this episode. We are a viewer and listener supported podcast, so we really appreciate you listening, watching on YouTube. We really encourage you to subscribe to whatever platform you're using. If you're on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, or if you're on Apple or however you listen to a podcast, be sure and subscribe. We greatly appreciate it. Also, make comments if you like it and share it if you like it. We really need people to make comments and share the episodes that you like. And then also, if you're not already a supporter, we really would encourage you to go to spiritualityadventures.com and you can pick a tier, and we have bonus content for every type of giver. This is a nonprofit, so they're tax-deductible donations, but we do provide bonus content for those who are supporters. So be a part of the team, help support Spirituality Adventures, and we're so glad you're tuning into this episode. Welcome, everybody, to Spirituality Adventures. So glad you're tuning in today. I am excited to have Brian McLaren back on the podcast. We did an interview 2 years ago with on his book, Faith After Doubt and Do I Stay Christian? And on YouTube, that has become our biggest listened to podcast of the 3 years I've been doing this.
Well, first off, I can't believe that's 2 years ago. And I'm glad that it struck a note with people.
Yeah, it's great. And then you follow up with Life After Doom.
Mm.
Oh, my goodness. So here I am, this kid that was smoking weed and as a young teenager gets saved at a Southern Baptist youth camp, feels called to be a pastor, goes to Baylor and Southwestern Seminary. And all these years later, I'm now interviewing Brian McLaren on Life After Doom. Think about that, Brian.
That's right. That's right. Many different interpretations of that event.
I have REM's song, It's the End of the World, as
yes.
Going on in my head.
And I feel fine. Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. All right. Well, thank you so much for being on Spirituality Adventures again. And let's jump into this. And when I started reading the book, I've been in tune with this stuff for a long while. But as I was reading it, I was saying, gosh, this whole evangelical mindset of Jesus coming back and Armageddon and all this, and because I still have some evangelicals hanging on listening to me,
Yeah, sure.
And so I was thinking, I hope he addresses some of that. And then sure enough, man, you hit it head on.
I did. Yeah.
7 and 8. I was going, oh man. So let's start with just the beginning. I still bump into climate deniers,
Yeah.
all over the place, and especially, honestly, in the evangelical community, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's very, very big. In fact, that's probably the stronghold of that and fossil fuel industry employees
Right.
and investors. Yeah.
Yeah. So give us the gloom and doom of what ecological overshoot is, and how in chapter 2 you talk about welcome to reality. And you do your 1, 2, 3, 4 scenarios. All are collapse scenarios because we've waited too long. We've overshot too long.
Mm.
All of them involve collapse. It's just how fast or how slow or how thorough or does it even end in extinction of some sort, right? So
Yeah.
give us the hard reality.
Sure.
What is overshoot? What is ecological overshoot?
Sure.
And what's the real scenario going on right now?
Well, I'm really glad you start there, Fred, because the concept of overshoot, I think anyone can understand. And, all of us have political lenses. The people who see other people's political lenses and don't see their own need to realize, we all have them. And we get those lenses from the groups we belong to. So we could be part of a group that tells us in this group, you're not allowed to say the word climate change. I live in a state where we've had several governors who make that a state policy. You can't say the word, as if not saying it makes it go away.
Wow.
But if we go deeper to the level of overshoot, whatever your political background, I think you can get this. If a species, whether it's people or bees or whales or foxes, if we take out more resources from our environment than the environment can replenish, or if we pump out more waste products than the environment can detoxify, we will not survive. That's the idea of overshoot. We're all taking things out from the environment and we're pumping things out into the environment, but we have to have a relationship with the environment where we don't take out more than it can reproduce or replenish, and we don't pump out more waste than it can detoxify. For people with an evangelical or other conservative Christian background, I think that's one of the deep meanings of the Genesis story of creation. Human beings are put in a garden, and a lot of people take this literally, a lot don't, but it doesn't matter. The meaning's still the same. Human beings are put in this beautiful environment, and they're told you can enjoy everything in this environment. You just have to observe one limit. You have one limitation that you have to be aware of. And so that's this realization of overshoot. We live with abundance, but also within limits. And when we don't observe that one limitation, then you can think of it this way. Over hundreds and hundreds of generations, the parents give their children an environment that's impoverished compared to the environment that they inherited. The soils are less fertile. The waters have less fish. The land has less animals. And there's more pollution to deal with. That's our condition. That's our big story. And this has been going on for a very long time. We human beings have not lived wisely with the planet, and so we're reaping what we've sown. And for people who take the Bible seriously, they should remember those words from Galatians. God is not mocked. You reap what you sow. If you want to think of it in terms of physics, if you're trying to have a bunch of causes without any effects, and the causes are, especially in the last 150 years, sucking out oil and coal from the earth and burning it so it's in the atmosphere. When that happens, we're going to have consequences. And would it be helpful, Fred, for me to give the 4 basic scenarios?
Yeah. And I want you to give the 4 basic scenarios. And I also want you to tell us what are the biggest contributors to, even if you just focus on the carbon that's in the atmosphere, what are the 3 biggest contributors to that? And then also, is it true that the oil companies are the ones that started the thing about carbon footprint just to get the off themselves?
Yeah, I don't know if they thought of it, but they are the ones who promoted it, because what this did is it made individuals feel responsible and guilty about carbon, and it deflected attention from their responsibility in this whole thing. So yeah, it's ugly. It's very much like the cigarette companies suppressing information about the effects of nicotine, even though it killed people. The fossil fuel industry has not only been doing it in the past, but it's doing it now. In fact, a lot of people know that President Trump called the leaders of the major oil companies to Mar-a-Lago recently, former President Trump, and said, if you'll donate $1 billion to my campaign, I will make sure that we can drill, baby, drill all we want. So, this would have been called bribery in the past, but when with oil companies, they're a lot like former President Trump. They seem to get away with anything they want to do. But 4 scenarios, very simple. They all are related to collapse, although 3 of them are very much in collapse. So first is collapse avoidance. The idea here is that we are heading toward a civilizational and ecological collapse. The problem is, for us humans, our civilization will collapse. Our economy, our economic systems, and all that depend on it will collapse before the environment itself collapses, well before it, for reasons we could talk about. But collapse avoidance, the first scenario is that we will get our act together and turn things around. fast enough to avoid such serious ecological effects that would lead our civilization, our economic systems, our political systems to collapse. And some people believe that's possible. Still, others believe it's too late. Second one is collapse, rebirth. And this would say, yes, we are not going to get our act together in time, and there will be a collapse, but we will learn a lesson from that collapse, and we will start to rebuild an ecological civilization on the other side of it. That's the collapse rebirth scenario. Third is the collapse survival scenario. And that says we will not do what we need to do fast enough, which, by the way, the best scientists have told us, and so far they've been unbelievably accurate. And where they've been inaccurate, it's that the problem is worse than they predicted, not less severe than they predicted. But they're telling us we have to reach zero new emissions by 2050 at the latest. I mean, that is staggering. And for all the progress we're making, our emissions are still going up every year. I think they're going up by, last year was something like, this might have been 2022, it was something like 17%. So they're still going up. We've got to stop them from going up and then have a zero emissions of carbon. But collapse survival would say we will not learn our lesson in time. And the extent of our collapse will be so great that the people who survive will survive in a post-industrial world, which will be a lot more like a pre-industrial world when we lose the sophistication of our civilization, technology, and so on. And then the fourth is we could actually, on the way down, the destabilization of civilization could lead to nuclear war, where, let's say, Russia says, I don't care if the rest of the world dies. We have a lot of northern latitude. So Russia could say, we'll be happy to start a nuclear war, wipe everybody else out, and that'll leave everything that's left for us, right? And you could easily imagine a foolish president pressing the button in the United States in a war with Russia or China or whatever. When you unleash nuclear weapons, and there's a bunch of other things that we could talk about that could happen, we really could bring ourselves to a point of making ourselves and a whole lot of other life on Earth extinct. And it's not just kooks talking about this. Especially when you get behind the scenes, you find out that that very serious, thoughtful, well-informed people understand that they can see the chain of events, the chain reaction that could lead us to that kind of trouble. And so we don't face any easy circumstances, because even if we could achieve collapse avoidance, getting from here to there will be messy.
It's going to be a painful journey.
Yeah.
I've heard Bill McKibben suggest that there could be 1 billion climate refugees by 2050, I think, or something like that.
That people have no idea. And that's one of the things that could really disrupt. You could look at the last 20 years and say a huge amount of the global political instability in the world has come from just about 1 million people in Syria being displaced by unrest there. Unrest that, by the way, is related to climate change in Syria. But imagine tens of millions, hundreds of millions, up to 1 billion climate refugees. I just think we can't imagine how the world would handle that. Right. Yeah. So it would be it will be a different future, which means we would be so much smarter to stop being climate denialists now. One of the things I studied in some depth in preparing for the book, it didn't actually make it into the book, but I wanted to understand how people do risk assessment, insurance companies and military leaders and so on. And the basic idea of risk assessment is if something is very likely, you assess likelihood and you assess severity of impact. So if something is very likely, but it has a very low impact, you don't need to worry about it. But if something is relatively unlikely, but still possible, but would have the most severe impact, you have to take it seriously. And this is where to watch what so many political leaders are doing by denying and not taking seriously. I mean, the stupidity of it, it just makes you want to throw up. It's disgusting.
What are the biggest contributors to climate change in the negative direction? It's fossil fuels, methane, trying to feed 8 billion people with cows and pigs and sheep.
Yes.
Is that a big one?
Yes. So let me start by there is some disagreement. It's not easy to quantify all these things, right? But here's a really interesting one. To get oil, natural gas, and coal out of the earth is not easy, especially if you're getting it out from under the deep ocean, right? We've already gotten all of the oil, gas, and coal that's easy to get. So everything we get from this point forward is hard to get, which means it takes a lot of energy to get that energy out. And they're using fossil fuel energy to get the fossil fuels out, right? So here's the irony. One of the biggest emitters of fossil fuels is the fossil fuel industry. There's something called energy return on investment. It's a really big deal. If people are interested in it, they can just Google energy return on investment and they'll see what I'm talking about. But some of the major emitters are agriculture, manufacturing, housing, and especially not just individual homes, but when you add all of the buildings that are needed by business, factories, and so on, and transportation. Those are really, really big ones. Could I add one other one, though, Fred, that people need to understand? One of the things, those of us who are knowledgeable about this and care about it, we wake up, and it's almost impossible to wake up without thinking about this from day to day. And that is, there are huge amounts of fossil fuels stored in permafrost in the northern latitudes and stored under shallow oceans in the Arctic especially. And if we keep pumping out and burning fossil fuels into the atmosphere, we will eventually reach a point where all of that natural fossil energy, all that carbon, will be released from the tundra and from frozen shallow seas. And when that happens, it just puts everything on a super fast accelerator. So we have our current emitters that then prepare the way for, what people call doomsday loops. That's the term they use.
Yeah. Holy crud. So as you get your head around this, you're like going, I mean, you start settling into the reality of this, right? You wake up. So then in chapter 3 and 4, you kind of take a pause and try to help us situate ourselves in this doom scenario. One of them, chapter 3, I thought that was it. I kind of thought, so I've been in a 2-year training with Tara Brach and Jack Kornfield on mindfulness meditation.
Yes.
The Vipassana Buddhist tradition. And I've been leading meditation classes now for a couple of years and have one tonight. But I thought chapter 3 was kind of a fun way to introduce people to mindfulness or contemplative approaches to life, where you might just make a comment there. And then chapter 4, you dove into grief and how to deal with grief. So I thought you kind of pause a little bit to kind of let us observe these things in healthy ways. Yes. Well, healthy.
Really, this is, you think about some of us have had experiences like this, or people we love very much and very close to have had experiences where you're going along with your life and you have a minor symptom, you go to your doctor, and 24 hours later, you're being told you have stage 4 cancer, right? This just happened to a dear friend of mine. And that's a lot to process, right? It's a lot to process. Well, in a certain way, where every human being on the planet is having to process is that we're in a very dangerous situation. Um, and and so what I try to do in chapter 3, that's called Mind Your Mind, is help people understand what's going on in their nervous system when they're trying to process information like this. Help. And I felt this is important to include because I watched it happen in me. I watched myself ping pong back and forth between everything's going to be okay. I get this tiniest bit of good news. Everything's going to be okay. Or else I get some more bad news. Forget it. It's all hope is lost. And I wondered, why am I attracted to the extremes? And then I started to realize, this has to do with the ways that the brain works. So I think this is going to be a great time for all of us to learn self-regulation and when I said the brain, what I really should say is our nervous system, because it's not just the brain, it's the brain and the body. It's our whole nervous system. So that's what I tried to do in chapter 3. And then the issue of grief, the emotional impact.
Grief.
Yeah.
Real quick. In Kansas City, we have a Midwest mindfulness community.
Yes.
And a couple years ago, when I first started doing the podcast, I met a woman named Sammy Aaron, whose son was a environmental activist, but got so depressed over that he actually committed suicide.
Yes.
And then in healing from that and responding to that, she started a nonprofit called Resilient Activists.
Yes.
That works with people who, like yourself, who absorb the depth of this information and see how real it is. Then how do you deal with the emotional, which that's what so this is what you're doing in the Mind Your Mind, and then with the grief part.
Yes.
I want to insert that because it's a real thing. I mean, people who really go into the depths of this really can struggle with darkness and depression in a deep way.
Yes.
So the grief part is, anyway.
And here's where it works. I mean, obviously, if we become so overwhelmed, we lose our will to live, and and it just undoes us. That's super tragic. Mm-hmm. But here's the scary thing. Because that's so tragic and intimidating, it's very likely for other people that what their minds will do is say, there is a politician who tells me none of this is real. There is a televangelist who tells me none of this is real. We will psychologically be sucked with a kind of cult-like fervor into these groups that will help us maintain a kind of a force field between us and some of these realities. And sadly, every year that happens increases the chances of worse things happening, right? So this is where it's one of the reasons I wrote the book, and really it's only chapter 2 where I really give the bad news. The rest of the book is trying to help us cope with that in a wise and intelligent way, and in fact that's why the subtitle is Wisdom and Courage for a World Falling Apart. So, and that's where the issue of grief comes in, and I have to say. As a writer, I know some people write books and it's just they do a brain dump of stuff from their head. They know this, they have it all figured out. When I write books, I'm usually wrestling with a problem, and the book comes out of what I have to do to help myself in wrestling with the problem. And writing that chapter on grief has really helped me. Probably the chapter on grief and the chapter on hope were the 2 chapters that helped me the most. But what I've realized is that grief and love are so inextricably related. If you try to suppress your grief, you end up suppressing your love. If you have a lot of love, then when the thing you love is threatened, you will feel a lot of grief. And it's really helped me to stop thinking of grief and love as 2 separate things, but to start to see them as two like hemispheres of one reality, that you can't have one without the other.
Wouldn't exist without the other. I think you endorsed Jonathan Foster here in Kansas.
Yes. Oh,
His book Indigo, I just
oh,
interviewed him on Indigo. You know, his daughter was killed in a car accident several
yes,
years ago. And he wrote, you know, from a sort of a process
yes.
grief. I felt like it was one of the most beautiful books I've ever.
Oh,
I cried through it. I cried when I interviewed him.
oh.
My goodness. Yeah.
In fact, just today I put out on social media a quote from Jonathan Foster.
Um,
He is someone who has grappled with grief in a very beautiful and profound way.
and then I haven't read Bittersweet yet by Susan Cain. I read her book Quiet because I'm an introvert.
Yes,
I was pastor
yes.
mega church as an introvert. I caught hold of her book and resonated with that so much, but I had not picked up Bittersweet yet. But that's
Yeah.
one I need to read.
If you put Bittersweet and then Jonathan Foster's Indigo together, you would have a graduate course in the human reality of grief. Yeah.
Wow. 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 All right. So chapter 5, Brian. All right. When the story does harm, step away. Can I quote you
Sure.
on a couple of things here? So this is my world, right? This is the world. You
Yeah.
grew up Plymouth Brethren. I didn't realize that they were as dispensationalist as some of my Baptist friends.
In fact, the Plymouth Brethren invented dispensationalism.
Yeah, I didn't realize it came from that source. But oh, so fundamental dispensationalism or fundamental
Yeah.
religion, however you want to define that, and fundamentalist capitalist.
Mm,
And then in America, how those two things go together, and maybe in other countries as well. But
yeah.
here's the quote. Here's the two quotes that stuck out to me. I've come to see that the religious elite and the corporate elite are part of the same cabal, knowingly or unknowingly. Right up to this moment, they share together in the short-term profits of ecological overshoot and plunder. And then the second quote, if you want to withdraw your consent from ecological overshoot, you will need to disidentify with the stories told by both religious fundamentalists and economic fundamentalists. You will need to break up with the ideologies and narratives that have intimately shaped you, which, by the way, with my Southern Baptist upbringing and being discipled, those shaped me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those shaped me for sure. And they still have some strong residue in me, Brian.
Yes, me too. Me too. That's right. Yeah. And even people who've never,
for people
Yeah.
who sitting out there thinking Jesus is coming back, Armageddon, it's not going to matter. It's all going to get, yeah. Anyway, help us.
well, I mean, the first thing I'd say is I hope folks from that background will be curious and read the book, and especially those chapters, because when I look back on my childhood and what I picked up being a sincere kid growing up in that kind of background, I realized that I grew up being taught that the vast majority of people were going to be destroyed, sent to hell, and that the whole world, including all animals, plants, ecosystems, everything else, was going to be brutally destroyed, and that I should be happy about it because I was going to heaven, and because my team would win, my religion would win, would be shown to be right and true, and so on. I mean, when I look back on that, I just think that's a pretty scary thing to put into a child's heart and mind. It's scary because, in a sense, it makes you nothing really matters except your soul and other people's souls and your church and religion. I mean, that is a great racket for a religious enterprise to venture into. You could raise a lot of money with a racket like that. And I know people will be saying, "Oh, but it's true because the Bible says so." Well, you think it's true because people you trust said that's what the Bible says. But as you know from later in the book, I think there's a very, very different way to read and interpret the Bible. And if people would give these two ways of reading and interpreting the Bible, a fair shot to each of them, I think they'd realize that this way they've been taught to read and interpret the Bible, taught by sincere people who trusted other sincere people,
Yeah.
There's a better way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to get to that hope chapter, but before we do that, chapter 7 and 8, you dovetail really well with chapter 5, right?
Yeah.
Chapter 5, you kind of trying to expose the dangers of this fundamentalist religion, fundamentalist economics, and how they partner together, certainly right now in America, for sure. And
before we move on, could I just say one other thing about that? 20 years ago, I've been around a long time. 23 years ago, I wrote some books where I talked about Jesus and Jesus' concern for the poor and the basic biblical concern for the poor. And I cannot tell you how many people emailed me or would come up to me when I was giving a talk, and they would say, listen, why try to improve economic systems? Why try to improve this world systems? Jesus is coming back soon anyway. God's going to destroy it all anyway. Why even bother? It's just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, they would say. And then they would say, and didn't Jesus say, the poor you will have with you always, right? And I just thought, this script has been taught to people around the world, literally New Zealand, Australia. I had people say this to me, of course, here in the United States and in England and elsewhere. So this way of interpreting the Bible has gained, a global following. And then when I started talking about the environment, exactly the same thing. Look, why try to save the earth? God wants to destroy it anyway. And people would literally say to me, we might as well return it empty since, it's not going to be around. We're the king's kids. We might as well live like kings. Oh my gosh, the irresponsibility of that breaks my heart, but it's very widespread.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. So, what's fascinating, I did a D-Min at Fuller in church growth with Peter Wagner. Okay.
Yes.
So we won't go into all of that, right?
Yes.
Colonialism and anyway. I mean, there's some good stuff that was in there.
Right.
A whole bunch of stuff. And then I was doing a PhD in the Hebrew Bible down to my dissertation, and was writing a dissertation on the kingdom of God in the Torah, because of the kingdom of God theology had influenced the Vineyard so much.
Yes.
George Eldon Ladd to N.T. Wright, that sort of stream, the already not yet of the kingdom.
Yes.
And a lot of Old Testament guys, and even, didn't see the kingdom in the Torah. They see it starting with David, but I saw it starting with chapter 1 of Genesis.
Yes.
Mandate. Yes. And so I was translating translating the first 3 chapters of Genesis and doing deep exegesis on all of that, with the view in mind that you articulated very well in chapter 8 and 9. I won't go into that, but I would highly, I'm thinking about going back to my dissertation with Tom Warden, rewriting the whole thing, God's divine commonwealth through a process, and seeing covenant through a process, co-creator idea, partnering with divine commonwealth. Anyway, I'm thinking about doing that. So pray for me. But one of the things I wanted to, in your chapter 8 and 9, I really want to recommend people just read those 2 chapters in terms of your interpretation of Genesis 1, 2, and 3. And then on into really, you run through the first 11 chapters of Genesis, basically, with a different take than what we were taught in our evangelical world. I also love Michael Fox or Matthew Fox's book, Original Blessing.
Yes.
Tackled those chapters.
Yes.
And I also liked his theology of darkness and via negativa.
Yes.
And I
Yes, it's
thought
so good.
if you read your book with original blessing
Mm,
and then reinterpreted those chapters of Genesis through the lens that you're giving, I think people who love the Bible would get to a different place.
oh my, oh my. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So help unpack chapter 8 and 9 for us. How should we go about reading this Bible when so many people, even like myself, were taught one way to read this,
Yes.
and we've heard it so many times and it's being reinforced for decades. And yet when you break it apart and look at it again, you're going, oh my God, I don't even need to read it. There's a whole new way to read this.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
It's so much more true to reality than denying.
Yes. Yes.
So
Yes.
much more true to reality. Anyway, I'm let take off on your chapter 8 and 9, Brian.
Yeah.
Up the way. Don't read the Bible, at least the old way you used to read it.
Yes. Yes. Oh my goodness. Well, I was an English major, undergraduate and in graduate school. I was a college English teacher. And so, in a sense, I spent a lot of years of my life just trying to learn how to read texts. And I realized that was a great gift for trying to read the Bible, because I was taught such an indoctrinated way of reading the Bible. And you realize how much work different denominations or types of Christians have to invest to get people to read the Bible the way they want them to. Like everybody says, oh, it's in the Bible, it's so simple. Well, if it was so simple, you wouldn't need 24/7 Christian radio stations and millions of dollars worth of books going out every year to make sure that people keep interpreting it this one way. So the first thing I'd say, I guess if I were to try to sum it up in a very simple way, is I would say, what was the problem that the ancient Jewish people were facing when they woke up every morning? It wasn't whether they go to heaven or hell. Ancient Jewish people didn't even believe in an afterlife. The Egyptians did to their south. The Babylonians did to their northeast and east. It seemed like everybody else was very big on an afterlife, but the Jews were really focused on this life. And the only way you can be confused about that is if you read the King James Bible that made just a mistake. They translated the Hebrew word Sheol, that just means the grave or the place of the dead. They translated that as hell, and then Christians read all of their, well-developed theology of hell back into that.
Right. And by the way, Sheol is just connected to land and a way to honor and remember ancestors and the dead, kind of. Yeah. So anyway, yeah, you're right. Not the kind of concept of hell that Christians today think of.
Exactly. And so the problem that the ancient Jewish people were facing is that they were indigenous people. They were tribal people. There were 12 tribes living among many other tribes. And what was happening in the world were there were these Bronze Age civilizations that were developing. So the Egyptian civilization had been through many permutations, but there was a version of it that was very, very powerful. And then there was an Assyrian version of it that became very powerful. And then, a Babylonian, an Assyrian, and then later there were Greek and Syrian and then Roman versions of it that show up in the New Testament. And so you could think of them very much like the Native Americans in the United States. It was the tribe of Naphtali and so on in the Middle East, similar to the Cherokee and the Potawatomi and so on in the United States. And instead of the British and the Spanish coming to invade and take over their land, it was the Philistines, or it was the Babylonians or the Assyrians or the Egyptians. And so in a certain sense, what you see, I think, in the Jewish people is an attempt to say, we have wisdom that has been given to us through our ancestors, and we ultimately believe this wisdom comes to us from the Creator. And this wisdom we need to retain, because if we're conquered by these other civilizations and they make us think like them, we will lose the wisdom that we have.
Mm.
That's the reason the Bible was written, to retain that ancient wisdom, because all of it was, before it was written down, it was carried on through oral tradition, the way tribal nations or tribal peoples carry on their wisdom. So all that's to say, when we put it in that context, the Bible becomes more relevant to our current time than ever before, because we are in a situation where our global civilization has taken over the world. And now we realize that civilization is destroying the world and is a great threat to us. So we need ancient wisdom like never before. Unfortunately, so many of our theological systems have taught us how to not understand the ancient wisdom and reinterpret it through the lens of colonial, extractive, destructive powers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the subtle things, and it's not so subtle, but I mean, for some people in the evangelical world who haven't examined these things, it could be hard to see, right? And you bring up our biases in one of your appendices at the end, which was really good. But the thing I realized, like, Constantine and the union of church and state.
Yes,
and you have instead of being a persecuted minority, the church, a persecuted minority, which was what Jesus was, which was the story that you're referring to. Of the whole story can be read through the lens of empire versus persecuted, marginalized minorities.
Yes.
If you read the whole Bible through that lens, it changes the gospel. The gospel is, you begin to see the gospel. You can't, like what I begin to say, Brian, is you can't understand the gospel through the eyes of imperialism. And that's what Christian nationalism is. It's union of church and state.
Oh my gosh.
The church building the crosses instead of bearing the crosses. And it misses the whole point of the gospel, which can only be read accurately through the eyes of the oppressed.
Oh my goodness. Whether
it's Black, indigenous people in America, or just go all the way back to what you're talking about. I mean, people don't realize Israel was a dinky little town that was a dinky little country that was persecuted by the big powers.
Yeah.
So they forged a theology of the oppressed. But then as soon as kings got in power, the oppressed becomes the oppressor so quickly. And then God raises up the prophets to bring them back to, anyway. But
my goodness,
that insight alone, just reading the Bible through the eyes of the oppressed, takes you to a whole new gospel than what we really taught in our evangelical world, right?
And again, we Americans should be able to understand this, because in elementary school, we are taught that the first Americans came here on the Mayflower. Early Americans came here on the Mayflower seeking freedom from religious persecution. And so this word freedom is really linked. Freedom means liberation from oppression. We were being oppressed in Europe, so we came here seeking freedom. But then what happened? We then became the oppressors. And we stole the land of people. We enslaved people. Or we, meaning our ancestors, did this. And we then have to make a decision, living people today. Do we want to stay with the oppressive stories of our ancestors? Or do we want to say, oh, our ancestors made a mistake. It's a mistake that many other people have made. Let's not stay loyal to the mistake. Let's change our thinking. And of course, at that moment, change our thinking is what the word repent means. It doesn't just mean feel sorry for, some having a dirty thought or something like that, right? It's much bigger than that. It means rethink your whole way of life, and rethink what you've been taught. And it's a liberating word. Yeah, it's so powerful.
I love it. So we're going to run out of time. I could talk to you for hours about this stuff. I love chapter 12. Obviously, I've been in the 12-step world now for almost 5 years, Brian, and I lead 12-step groups and, pastoring again. And so I love that chapter 12, you start with step 1.
Yes.
And by the way, as I've gone through the 12 steps, what I've realized is everybody needs to go through 12 steps. I don't know if you remember when I interviewed you on Do I Stay Christian? I made a comment to you. I said, it's like you're taking Christianity through the 12 steps.
Yes.
But I still think that's like true, and we sort of need to take our economic views through the 12 steps, and we need a lot of things. So, but, let's talk about, let's close with some of your thoughts on hope, because you said that chapter and the hope chapter really meant the most to you as you were trying to grapple with these things in your own heart and mind and world.
Yeah.
Let's talk about hope. In the midst of doom.
Yeah.
And like, if you've got a stage 4 cancer prognosis, how do you live in light of that the rest of your life? Yeah. What's hope about?
Yeah.
And it might not be a better outcome, right? So, but most of us and me, we love a redemptive story, right? So we like that good outcome.
Yes.
Talk about hope. What insights did you gain on hope as you unpack this in the context of this doom that we're living in?
Well, one of the things I should say, back in 2007, 2008, I wrote a book called Everything Must Change. And that was my first time really immersing myself in the literature on global crises. And so now, over 20 years, or almost 20 years later, I want to catch up. I've tried to stay informed, but I did a deep dive in this. And one of the things that's happened in the last 20 years is that certain people have said, hey, there is a downside to hope. Hope can make people not take their problems seriously enough. They look on the bright side. If they do that too much, they miss how grave the situation is. And then that makes them comfortable with just carrying on with somewhat easy, superficial, slow, incremental change, when what we really need is profound, deep change. And so I was surprised to find a kind of anti-hope movement. And then other people, of course, get very upset because rightly they say, look, when they say the word hope, they mean the will to live or the motivation to keep trying. And so when they see people being negative on hope, they think that's the same, that leads to despair, despondency, giving up, and resignation. And I felt that there was truth on both of those sides. And that's what I tried to capture and explore in that chapter. It was, in some ways, the biggest struggle of writing the book. When I felt like I'd worked with that struggle and gotten some meaning out of it, I felt like, okay, I'm ready to write a book now. That was because we're in a situation. Here's the way I would say it. We aren't in a situation where we're playing to win, because all of our options involve loss. What we're doing now is we're playing to survive, and to survive with the least losses possible. But here's the thing. As soon as you accept that, something starts to happen to you and you think, there will be some major gains through all of these losses, right? And I think about you. Many people have had the experience of being divorced, and they do everything they can to save their marriage. And then they reach a point where it's not going to be saved. And they think, my life is over. My family is over. But they think, but you know what? My life isn't over. And I now have another chapter of the story. It's not a chapter I would have chosen, right, but I have to accept it now. And now I have to make the best of it. I never would have written this into my own script, but it has come into my script. And so now the best life I can have is with this part of it now, as part of it now. And that's a similar situation, I think, to what we face. We have been raised married to capitalism and married to white supremacy and married to all kinds of things. we're going to find out that there will be a very good life after the end of this relationship.
Brian, I mean, a little of my story, but 5 years ago, I've been, my own failures have been broadcast publicly all around the world, actually.
Yeah.
I really wanted to die. I mean, I was dark, and I didn't know if I lived or died. And I literally felt like an atheist. Like I was so dark. It's like it didn't feel like God was there. And then and then I had enough fuel to think like an atheist because I've read so much, and I'm not an atheist, folks. But the God that I've rethought is really this relation process kind of thought. But the point is that I thought, well, even if there's not a God, and it felt like the universe was against me, and it felt like everything had fallen apart, and I questioned and doubted everything. But I thought, even if there's no God, I know I've experienced love. I know I've experienced beauty. I know I've experienced creativity and generosity. Those things exist.
Yes.
But that's what I want to give myself to, even if there's forgiveness. And I Richard Rohr's quote about, you pretty much have to forgive reality itself.
Yes.
And so that's what I started trying to rebuild my core values on. And I thought it resonated so much with how you were viewing hope. What is hope, Brian? If you had to put a point to it, how do you see hope now in light of what?
Well, the quote that really was catalytic for me came from Václav Havel, who was the president of Czech Republic, and also a playwright and poet, which to me is a great combination. And he said, hope is not the conviction that things will turn out as we wish. Hope is the conviction that some things are worth doing no matter how they turn out. And if I make a sports analogy, so let's say you're playing basketball and you're into the third quarter and you're really behind. And then you go into the fourth quarter, and in the first 8 minutes of the fourth quarter, you get farther behind. At that point, you reach a point where you say, the only way we're going to win is if the other team were to walk off the court and just let us play by ourselves, right? And so you could just say, well, then we're going to walk off the court. If we can't win, why even stay? But when you love the game of basketball, you say, the reason we stay is because we love this game, and losing can be part of the game. So we're going to lose well. That's called good sportsmanship. Some things are worth doing, whether you win or lose, when you love the game. And when we love life, some things are worth doing, no matter the outcome. And here's the irony of this. When you believe that and you think some things are worth doing, you'll do them even when the odds are against you. I think you just made the odds better than they would have been before. So that would be my hope as I see it now.
I love that. A few weeks or months ago, was it a month ago or so? I was with you in New York at the rooftop event at Rod Culver.
Yeah.
And great gathering. But, you kind of started off your talk there as, we really don't know shit, I'm sorry. But with everything in this world that's going on, how do you want to show up?
Yes.
How do you want to show up?
Yes.
And I definitely want to show up where love is. And I want to help spread that. I definitely want to show up in beauty and spread that. I definitely want to show up in creativity and spread that. And thank you, Brian. Thank you so much for your encouragement to me over the last few years. And folks, life after doom. It's not all gloom and doom. There's some hard realities to face, but we can do this, and we can do it in a way that hope rings true in this human spirit of ours. And the dream, Brian, that you have, the dream, I love it. Brian brought up the dream. What's your dream? Let's close out with your dream. And by the way, what's your website? Tell everybody real quick. And
it's just my name, brianmclaren.net. Yeah.
Life After Doom, and check it out. And let's end with your thoughts on the dream. What's your dream?
Well, maybe the best way for me to do that would be to just read a couple of paragraphs. Would that be okay?
Of course.
The irony is I have a chapter called Tell Them About the Dream, but then I actually talk about my dream in the following, following
right?
chapter.
I noticed
That's so here it is. This is my dream, and perhaps it is your dream and our dream together, that in this time of turbulence, when worlds are falling apart, all of us with willing hearts can come together with one another, poor and rich, whatever our race or gender, wherever we live, whatever our religion or education. I dream that some of us, maybe even enough of us, will come together not only in a circle of shared humanity, but in a sphere as big as the whole earth, to rediscover ourselves as Earth's multicolored, multicultured children, members of Team Earth. I dream that the wisdom of indigenous people, the wisdom of St. Francis and St. Clare and the Buddha and Jesus, the wisdom of climate scientists and ecologists and spiritual visionaries from all faiths could be welcomed into every heart. Then we could look across this planet and not see economic resources, but our sacred relations. Brother dolphin and sister humpback whale swimming in our majestic indigo oceans, with sister gull and brother frigate birds soaring above them beneath the blue sky. We would see all land as holy land and walk reverently in the presence of sister meadow and brother forest, feeling our kinship with brother bald eagle and sister box turtle, sister song sparrow and brother swallowtail butterfly, all our relations. And it continues from there. Yeah.
Beautiful. Preach it, brother. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you. What a pleasure to be with you. You asked such good questions. And can I just say, as a writer, it's very meaningful as a writer when I can tell the person I'm talking to has read the book so deeply. So thanks so much for that, Fred. Real pleasure.
Well, it's been a blessing to me, and I appreciate you so much. Thanks, everybody, for tuning into Spirituality Adventures. And thanks, Brian, so much for joining us. Hope to see you soon. Maybe in Kansas City even. So
that sounds good.
Take care. Blessings, everybody. Next time.
Sir.
Hey, you made it to the end. Thanks for listening all the way through on this episode. By the way, if you're not already a supporter, go to spiritualityadventures.com, sign up for one of our monthly supports, and you will receive our bonus content. You'll receive lots of interesting information about our guests. Many of our musicians will do special bonus songs and record a song. So I want to encourage you to do that. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Be sure and subscribe. Be sure and share any of the episodes that you like. And be sure and make comments if you like them as well. This helps us get Spirituality Adventures out there to more listeners, more watchers. So whatever platform you're using, subscribe, like, share, make comments, and go to our website, sign up for our team, and be a part of the team support. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.